Hi, I've got a blue-winged warbler as the subject of this small 10 by 7 inch transparent watercolor. I got photo reference for this guy at McGee Marsh in Ohio. Our family takes a birding trip down there most springs. My goal with this one, after coming off a very large complex painting, was to do something simple and fast and kind of go back to basics. So I wanted to have a simple composition of the bird on this one, and to keep it from just being a boring bird on a stick, I wanted to have kind of a smoky perspective background with very subdued colors, and just kind of have it fade into the background. To do that, I ended up pre-wetting all of my paper. By pre-wetting the paper, that allows you to have a super smooth background. Disadvantage to pre-wetting the paper is that you lose a little bit of your saturation. But in this case, I wanted to have a really kind of light, pastel-y kind of background. So I pre-wet the paper, and then I started bringing in my washes of my greens and yellows and blues. And I kind of switched between a couple of different brushes on this. I used mostly a 1-inch flat, and then I also would bring in some other colors with a, I believe it was a number 6 round brush. And I had frisked it off the bird and the main branches. And while it was still soaking wet, I dropped in some slightly darker colors to kind of have those mix on the page. One of the challenges I have is overworking things, and on this one I wanted to have just one background wash wet and then not touch it again, which surprisingly was very difficult for me. I like, kind of going back in and increasing the saturation and playing with it a lot. And on this one I wanted to just see what would happen if I just let it be and just had that really light background to work with. And you'll see me picking away at a little bit, and some of what I'm doing there is just pulling a little bit of the extra pigment off the page to keep it from puddling up a little. So once I had that background done with one wash, I then removed the frisket, and then I transferred the rest of my sketch over to the paper. You can see a little bit of my photo reference in the background, and you can see that it was a very saturated green background. It was a nice photo, but I thought that the bird kind of blended in a little more than I wanted with the background. So when I did the painting, I tried to subdue that background, make it much lighter, and have the bird kind of emerge from that. And that way I'd have greater contrast on the bird and let the background fade. I thought that would help it pop off the page more. So after I put in the lightest local colors, I went in with the second glaze, just bringing in some of these shading to the branches. And I was not very literal with the colors of the branches. I tried to bring in some blues and purples and things to make it a little bit more interesting, and then also use some of those background greens to kind of have it fade into the background a little bit more. Since it was frisketed, it had some stark white. I wanted it to fade into that background, so I brought in some of those background colors again with this number 2 brush. And it may be time for a new camera. This thing is being terrible about grabbing focus today. These blue-winged warblers are so cute. I used to see them a lot on my bike rides at a local park, and they would always be singing away, and they would breed in that area regularly, and it was a great distraction from your workout to go out there and then hear all these birds. You just have to stop and look at them, and they're just so pretty to watch. In the past few years, there haven't been as many in that particular area as it's grown up a bit. But I still enjoy seeing these whenever I get a chance. So this is still a number 2 round brush. That usually is a good compromise between sharpness in applying paint and then still holding enough paint that you can use it and not keep going back to your palette, so you can get a little bit more painting done with those. In having something fade into the background, there's kind of 3 ways to do that. One, you can have it be very fuzzy and out of focus. The other way is you can lose contrast. And I kind of, in this case, I kept it somewhat in focus, but I lost the contrast. So my edges of my branches as they fade didn't get any fuzzier or blend into the background, but as I painted them, I used less contrast with my pigments. They were still fairly sharp in the lines that I put down on them, but I just put in less of the detail. And then when I did use the detail, it wasn't as contrasty of an application of paint. So you still had the idea that there was detail in it, but it just didn't command as much attention from your eye. And you'll see a little bit, I'm kind of changing the plumage on the bird that I'm painting, and part of that was because the one I had was, I forget whether it was a female or a sub-adult male, but I wanted to have a little bit more showy plumage of a adult male bird, so I did change some of the plumage to match that. And what's interesting with these out of focus or, kind of more, atmospheric perspective as you're going back with those is that there's a tendency to not put any detail in those and just leave them and not pay attention to what they're doing. But what you really need to do is make sure they're doing the job that they need. And so sometimes you have to spend more time with these, just the right little shadow in those areas really helps push them back. And if you don't put that time in, sometimes they look like an afterthought. So it's kind of a catch-22 thing. You don't want to put so much that they become too important to your composition. At the same time, you need to put enough detail in there that when you look at it, it logically makes sense, and that there's some richness there to have them, a reason for them to be on the page at all. I also tried, since there's so much warm on the bird, as I painted these, I tried to introduce some of that warm to the branches that are kind of fading behind. If they didn't have some of that, I think the other branches would look a little lonely or like they didn't match as much. So here I am applying some of those warm tones. And late in the painting, I decided that I needed some more blue in this area to set off the belly of the bird and to give it a little bit better contrast with those areas. It just looked a little boring, and it needed a little bit more color injected into that area. I was much happier once I floated those in. I did sweat it a little because I was not sure that I wanted to go back into that background late in the painting, but I wasn't worried about lifting some of the pigments because that area wasn't that heavily painted in, so I knew I could get away with it. But I did like it much better with that blue dropped in. So here I was just picking away at the final details, kind of just adding the icing to the cake and making sure it was ready to go. So I put my signature on and I called it a day. This was a fun one to work on, and it was a great relief after a really, really long painting to do something quick and fun and energetic. Well, thanks for watching. If you have a chance, take a peek at the blog or leave a comment.